The car stopped in front of the shelter just as the sun began to dip behind the horizon. The evening light stretched long shadows across the cracked pavement, and a faint chill filled the air. Inside the backseat sat an old golden retriever named Charlie. His fur had turned silver around the muzzle, and his eyes, once bright and full of energy, were now clouded but gentle, full of trust. He had no idea that this would be the last car ride with the people he loved. Charlie's tail wagged softly as he looked out the window. He thought maybe they were stopping for a walk, maybe a visit to the park, where he used to chase tennis balls and roll in the grass. His owner, Mark, kept his eyes fixed on the steering wheel, his wife staring out the window in silence. They didn't speak a word. When they stepped out, Charlie followed eagerly, leash dragging on the ground, his paws slow but steady. He was happy just to be near them. He didn't notice that Mark's hands were shaking as he held the leash tighter, or that his wife avoided looking down at him. The shelter door creaked open, and the faint smell of disinfectant filled the air. The sound of barking dogs echoed from inside, some excited, some desperate. Charlie hesitated. He'd never been in a place like this before, but when Mark tugged gently, he followed. He trusted his humans. He always had. The woman at the front desk smiled kindly. "Can I help you?" Mark's voice cracked slightly. We need to surrender our dog." The words hung heavy in the air. Charlie tilted his head, confused by the unfamiliar tone in his owner's voice. The shelter worker nodded slowly, pulling out a form. "How old is he?" 13, Mark whispered. He's too old now. We just can't take care of him anymore." Charlie wagged his tail again, unaware that those words had just sealed his fate. He looked up at Mark, waiting for a pat on the head, waiting for some sign of what was happening. But Mark's hand didn't move. When the paperwork was done, the shelter worker knelt down to unclip Charlie's leash. That's when it happened. Charlie stepped closer to his owner, pressing his nose against his knee, asking quietly with his eyes, "Where are we going next?" Mark turned away. His wife whispered, "Come on." Charlie whined softly as the leash slipped from his collar and into the worker's hands. The door clicked shut behind them, and the sound of footsteps faded down the hallway. Charlie barked once, then again, his voice echoing in the cold room. He didn't understand. He sat by the door long after the car had driven away, ears perked, eyes fixed on the space where his people had disappeared. That night, when the shelter lights went out, Charlie lay in the corner of his kennel, his old bones pressing against the concrete floor. He hadn't touched his food. He hadn't moved much. Every now and then, he lifted his head when a car passed outside, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd come back. But the hours dragged on and no one came. His soft whimpers filled the quiet hall, a sound so gentle it was almost a whisper, like a heart breaking one note at a time. The next morning, the shelter staff found him still lying there, his eyes red from crying. "Poor old guy," one of them murmured. "He was surrendered yesterday, 13 years old." They opened his cage slowly, speaking softly so they wouldn't startle him. "Hey, buddy, it's okay, you're safe now." But Charlie didn't move. His tail thumped once against the ground, a tiny gesture of trust left in him. Days turned into weeks. Most visitors walked right past his kennel. Puppies jumped and barked for attention, tails wagging, eyes bright. Families stopped, smiled, and pointed. "Oh, look at that one. He's so cute." But no one stopped at Charlie's cage. His fur was graying, his eyes tired. The sign on his door read, "Senior, 13 years old." That was all it took for people to keep walking. One afternoon, a volunteer named Sarah sat beside his cage, holding out her hand. She came every day, bringing treats and a soft blanket. At first, Charlie barely responded. But one day, she noticed something. When she hummed softly, his ears perked. So she started talking to him about everything. Her day, her childhood dog, how she always believed that old dogs were the gentlest souls. Slowly, Charlie began to inch closer. He rested his head against the bars while she spoke, his breathing slow and steady, as if the sound of her voice gave him peace. A week later, Sarah asked the shelter manager if she could take him outside. "He's not eating much," she said. "Maybe he needs some sun." They agreed, and for the first time since his family left, Charlie stepped outside again. The light was bright, the air warm. His paws touched grass, and for a moment he looked like a puppy again, tail wagging faintly, eyes glimmering with something that looked like hope. Sarah threw a small tennis ball. Charlie didn't chase it, but he watched it roll across the ground and then looked back at her as if to say, "Thank you for trying." That night, when Sarah came to lock up, she stopped by his cage one last time. "Good night, Charlie," she whispered. He lifted his head and licked her hand through the bars. For the first time in weeks, he didn't cry. Days later, a couple visited the shelter. They were looking for an older dog, one that wouldn't run too fast or bark too much. When they walked past Charlie's kennel, he stood up slowly, tail wagging low, eyes meeting theirs. "He's beautiful," the woman said softly. "How old?" 13, the staff member replied. The man knelt down. "Hey, old fella," he whispered. Charlie stepped closer, resting his head against the glass. The man smiled. "He reminds me of the dog I had growing up." Sarah held her breath as the couple filled out the adoption forms. It was official. Charlie was going home. When the door to his kennel opened, he looked hesitant at first, but then he saw the leash, the symbol of going somewhere, maybe somewhere warm again, and his tail wagged faster. Sarah hugged him before letting go, whispering, "You deserve this, old boy." The drive home was quiet. Charlie sat in the backseat, eyes half closed, the wind brushing through his fur. When they arrived, the couple led him inside, where a soft bed waited by the fireplace. He circled twice, then lay down with a long sigh, his body relaxing for the first time in what felt like forever. That night, he didn't cry. He slept soundly, the soft crackle of fire filling the silence that once echoed with loneliness. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the window. The woman found him still asleep, his head resting on his paws, a gentle smile on his face. She knelt beside him and whispered, "Welcome home, Charlie." He blinked slowly, then leaned into her touch. He had finally stopped waiting for the people who left, because someone new had arrived, the kind of person who saw not age but heart. And as the days turned into weeks, Charlie rediscovered small joys. The smell of fresh grass, the sound of laughter, the warmth of hands that didn't let go. He might have been old, but in the eyes of those who loved him, he was perfect. Every night before he fell asleep, he'd look at the door, not with longing anymore, but with peace. The fear was gone. The loneliness was gone. And somewhere deep inside, the broken part of him began to heal. Because sometimes, the dogs the world forgets are the ones who remind us what love really means.